Welcome to Back to the Father, a show about the journey of life focused on our final end, which is God Himself, our loving Father. And now, here's your host, Dave Palmer.
And welcome, everybody, to this week's edition of Back to the Father, a production of the Guadalupe Radio Network. Today is May 5th, 2023, Cinco de Mayo, which I really don't know anything about other than you go out and you have a margarita if you like. But welcome. This is a show that is focused on the restoration of Christian philosophy according to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas in the Summa Theologia. It's what Pope Leo XIII wrote about in 1879 in his encyclical called Aeterni Patris. And so every show we talk about Aquinas and some of his teachings, and we also will, what we started doing last week is picking a particular philosopher, and not necessarily a great philosopher. It might be an errant philosopher, but we learn about this person and compare him to the teachings of St. Thomas Aquinas. And so it's kind of good even to learn from some of the errors, because we better understand how we got to where we are today and some of the mixed up ideas and notions that are found and pretty prevalent in our culture today. So we welcome you. I know there are a lot of new people that have joined this show since we restarted it last week, and we got about, 70, 80 people on our email list. If you'd like to get an email at the beginning of the week telling you not only the topics of the show on Friday, but also links to the Summa so you can prepare. I'm curious if anybody who's watching right now prepared for the show by reading the two articles that we're going to talk about in the first segment here of the Summa Theologia. And let us know, by all means, comment if you're watching on Facebook or one of our YouTube channels or Twitter. Let us know that you are there and comment, ask questions. You also can call in if you would like to do that. Our phone number is 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. This first slide that I have of our PowerPoint presentation says, "You think, therefore you are a philosopher." And as I mentioned last week, we are the only creatures in the world that think. Did you realize that? We are the only creatures that think. Dogs don't think, angels don't think, earthworms don't think, and squirrels don't think. It's us. And so we are philosophers by our very nature. It's just a matter of what philosophy is guiding your life. And I think the church would agree that if your philosophy is St. Thomas Aquinas, you're on pretty solid grounds. So anyways, welcome, and I'll tell you more about the three segments of the program here in just a moment. I do want to introduce in studio Sissel Anderson, who is doing triple duty. She's producing and co-hosting and also training people, because she's not going to be here next week. So welcome. Good to see you.
It's good to see you too. Yes, it's a fun show. It's got a lot of things going on, but I'm enjoying it because my blue light is actually working this week. So I have a nice little Marian blue going on behind me.
Yeah, it is nice to have some various colors.
Mary.
Yeah, it looks very nice. The whole studio, so to speak. This is our temporary studios. In about a month, we'll be moving across the hall here where we are in Irving, Texas. And so probably look even better then. And I love having Jesus behind me because St. Thomas Aquinas was madly in love with Jesus Christ. And really the whole thing was about Jesus. It's interesting. The show is called Back to the Father because so many philosophers and those who love the Summa have said the two words that kind of summarize the Summa are exitus and reditus, which means we exit or we're created by God, and then God pulls us back throughout our life. And if we have a successful life, it means we return back to the Father. And that's what the name implies. I like to compare it to a boomerang that is designed to get back to the one who threw it out, okay? Also in studio, our faithful high school intern friend, William Kirkendall. Welcome, William. How are you?
I'm doing well.
And you've done a little bit of research on our philosopher this week.
This morning, yes. Yes, not this week, this morning.
Typical high school student cramming for the test.
It's finals.
And the non-high school student did the same thing. So.
Yeah. And I did that when I was in high school. So he crammed for the test. But yeah, let me just kind of show you what's on the program today. That next slide, something I made for today. I'll probably do this every week. Segment 1, we're going to talk about the very first article of the Summa Theologia. I don't know if either of you remembered what it is. When I teach my high school class, I'm always going back to it because it's very fundamental. I mean, if you write a book, the first paragraph, the first chapter, the first page is going to draw people in, and they should have a pretty good idea of what the book's about by reading that first page, right?
Start at the very beginning. It's a very good place to start.
Yeah, start at the beginning, yes. And so what did Thomas write about in the first article? I'll see if you guys remember, and I'll explain that, and also give you a couple excerpts. And then we're going to review the 5 proofs for the existence of God, because many people are joining this show for the first time. We've done this before, but it is something that I think is worthy of committing to memory and being able to know these off the top of your head in case you get into a debate or a discussion with an atheist. Okay, segment 2, we are going to be reviewing what I call the fascinating life and teachings of French Enlightenment scientist and philosopher Blaise Pascal. This guy is a true Renaissance man. He was extremely accomplished even as a teenager. When he was younger than William, he was already writing like things that were being reviewed by college professors. They compared him to Pythagoras, from the Greek age, and just absolutely brilliant.
Yeah, when he was 16, he did. Was it something had to do with geometry? It was amazing.
The conical.
Does that just make you feel like you've done nothing in your life?
Yeah, I know. I got some catching up to do.
You still have some chance, William. You're.
Yeah.
And he also is credited for creating perhaps the first calculator / computer. Mm-hmm. And he did all this in his 20s. And then he went on, and he was a contemporary. And I'll tell you more about him in the second segment. I don't want to give too much away, but he had a huge mystical experience late in his life, and he decided everything that he had done in science he was going to put aside and focus entirely on theology. And he wrote a book, and it didn't finish, called Pensées, which translates from French into thoughts. Okay, these are just kind of random thoughts, and it's really fascinating. And of course, he had the Pascal's wager as well, which is his attempt to show that betting on the existence of God is a good bet. Let's just say you're a gambler, and you want to say, should I believe or should I not, strictly on like a gambling perspective, a win-loss comparison. And he comes to the conclusion that even if you're just gambling, it's a better bet to believe in God. Okay, so explain this. I don't know if you did any digging on this, but it's really quite fascinating. Mm-hmm. And then in the third segment, that's when we open things up and just say, hey, comment, call in. Last week we had a call. And that was kind of fun. We had a lady who called in, but again, 877-757-9424. 9424. 877-757-9424. And again, let's hear from you, comment and questions and anything that's on your mind related to this topic. All right, well, let's get right to it. And it's important to understand when we talk about St. Thomas Aquinas that he started off the first article, first part, first question, the Summa, with this question. Okay, there's going to be about 3,000 articles, the Summa. And he starts off by saying, whether besides philosophy any further doctrine is required. Okay, so he's basically saying, besides philosophy, which is what we can know through the light of human reason, the things that we can just kind of figure out, like algebra and chemistry and geometry and mathematics, do we need anything else? Okay, do we need anything supernatural that is given to us beyond our natural reason? Okay, do y'all remember this? I think it's been a long time. It might have been before your time, William. So you definitely get a pass. Sissel, not so much. I'm not sure.
Hang on a second.
I did read the documents, the Word documents you sent in that email. So I did get kind of an understanding about what we're talking about right now. But yeah, I probably wasn't here when you guys were talking about it.
Yeah. So St. Thomas is going to come down and say, yes, we do have to be taught about supernatural realities beyond what we can come to know through the light of our human reason. And the reason is that we have spiritual souls, and we are destined for a supernatural end. Okay, we all know that. I mean, you learn that in first grade CCD, right? That our goal is to get to heaven. Well, heaven is supernatural. It's not something down here below. And so if we only go by the light of human reason, then it's not enough to get us to our final end. But the other thing is that we can't get there on our own, so we have to have help from God to get us to where we need to get. Okay, so let me just kind of read a couple of quick paragraphs here. And this is from the first article, of the first question of the first part of the Summa.
111.
Yeah, we're starting off at the very beginning. And he says, yes, it was necessary besides philosophical science to be given something extra, okay? And he says it was necessary for man's salvation that there should be a knowledge revealed by God besides philosophical science built up by human reason. Firstly, indeed, because man is directed to God as to an end that surpasses the grasp of his reason. And then he quotes Isaiah, "The eye hath not seen, O God, besides thee, what things thou hast prepared for them who wait for thee. But the end must first be known by men who are to direct their thoughts and actions to the end. Hence it was necessary for the salvation of man that certain truths which exceed human reason should be made known to him by divine revelation." All right, now this is a really interesting paragraph, okay? Now, if you go about 4 lines down, it says man is directed to God as to an end that surpasses the grasp of reason. Okay, this whole idea of being directed to something is extremely controversial because remember last week when we were talking about Friedrich Nietzsche, I said that Nietzsche is what's called an existentialist. Okay, an existentialist believes that you create yourself. All right, you're born and you have existence, but you don't yet have essence. There's nothing. You're not being directed to anything in particular. You're certainly not being directed to any kind of supernatural, home. You're just creating yourself. And of course, we see that in today's culture, where men think they can create themselves into women, or teenage kids can create themselves into squirrels or bunny rabbits. I mean, it's crazy. But this is the root of this whole movement is existentialism, creating yourself in the image of yourself, whatever you want to be, okay? Thomas clearly has a different vision here. He says we are being directed by God to a final end, okay? Where are we being directed? Right back to him, back to the Father, okay? So hopefully that makes sense. And again, if you are out there watching and listening and paying attention to this, let us know if this makes sense and what you think about it. And okay, so one more paragraph in this corpus of the first article, first question of the Summa. He says, even as regards those truths about God which human reason could have discovered, it was necessary that man should be taught by a divine revelation, because the truth about God, such as reason could discover, would only be known by a few, and that after a long time and with an admixture of many errors, whereas man's whole salvation, which is in God, depends upon the knowledge of this truth. Therefore, in order that the salvation of man might be brought about more fitly and more surely, it was necessary that they should be taught divine truths by divine revelation, and it was therefore necessary that besides philosophical science built up by reason, there should be a sacred science learned through revelation. All right, so I don't know if that makes sense, but God created a church to help us get to our final end. Why? Because God loves us and He wants us to be successful in our journey. But then came along original sin and concupiscence, and that's the battle that's waged within each one of us. We're so distracted, we're so pulled off course so often, and that's the drama of life. Okay, but in the end, God is directing us. Like Adam and Eve before the fall were like perfectly being directed to their end because they didn't have concupiscence. They were in a state of original innocence, and it was all very good. Okay, so there's that. So any thoughts, or do you want to wait till third segment to talk about that?
I will wait till the third segment. I'll just jot on all these notes and then go from there. The third segment.
So all right, so the next segment, where the next slide here is basically what the Summa is about. We are here. We're living in this temporal world. We're interacting. We've got passions and appetites and free will and all this stuff going on. But our destiny and our goal is to get to heaven. Okay, but we wouldn't really know anything about heaven unless it was taught to us by some authority, like the Catholic Church. And of course, the Catholic Church wrote the Bible, and we get a lot of information about the Bible in sacreds from the Catholic Church. All right, we only have a couple of minutes here, but I want to review, because we'll be talking about Pascal's wager, which happens to, as I mentioned, talk about wagering on the existence of Christ. Let's talk about the 5 proofs for the existence of God. Okay, and I've got a little graphic here: motion, cause, possibility, necessity, perfection, and intelligence. I watched a video last night of a very brilliant professor from Hillsdale College, and he explained number 2 in about 15 minutes, okay, very intricately. It's impossible to explain these in the 4 minutes that I have in this segment, but I am curious how much familiarity those who are out there watching the program right now have these. If somebody were to hard press you to explain one of the proofs for the existence of God or one of these 5, I think, William, you've had some familiarity with them, haven't you?
I think so,
in
yeah.
school? Yeah, you learned?
Yes,
Okay.
theology. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so when I teach it to the high school kids, I'll explain them very quickly, which I'll do right now in a very, very quick manner because we don't have a lot of time, but I want to at least explain what St. Thomas Aquinas said. Basically, in a nutshell, Thomas says, we observe, I'll do the first 2 together, that there is motion going on in the world. Okay, here's my hand moving. We'll constantly see motion. When we look outside our window here on the 9th floor of our building, we see cars driving down the road. We see birds flying by, clouds in the sky moving. Okay, we also see cause and effect. We see things that are here. This desk that I'm sitting on, this didn't just appear here. This was caused by somebody, okay? Somebody put it here, somebody moved it here, somebody made it, okay? So what he says is that, if in both motion and cause and effects, one thing causes or moves another, and then you go back another layer and something caused that or moved it, and then you go back another layer. Interestingly, I just found this out last night. Aristotle thought that you could go back infinitely, that you can just keep going back and back and back and back and back. Now that's a mind bender, isn't it? To think that because you're
I would just lay and not think of anything else for the rest of my life.
I know it's crazy to think of it, but Thomas came along and said, no, you can't have what's called infinite regression, because he compares it, the guy that was heard last night, to like a big long infinite train that's moving in front of you, and it's just like you just say it's just moving and it just goes back infinitely, but your mind says no, something has to be moving it. It just doesn't move on its own. And so logically, what Thomas comes to the conclusion of is that there has to be an unmoved mover and an uncaused cause. And of course, he says this is God. Something has to have broken the rule and at the very beginning move or cause without being moved or caused itself. Okay, he says that's God. Possibility and necessity, very similar. Okay, he just says there's all kinds of possible things in the world, things that exist but are not necessary, like Sissel, she's great that she exists, but not absolutely necessary for the world, and me neither. And William, sorry to say it, not you either.
Man, what a way to end your work week, being told by your boss that you're not necessary.
Yeah, ultimately, you are to the GRN.
Thank you.
What do they say? The graveyard is filled with indispensable people. You ever heard that?
Yes.
It's like somehow the world goes on, right? Even though people die.
We have a comment from Jeremy on Facebook. He said, first off, that Matt Fradd does a presentation. He did this on Pints with Aquinas on the Five Proofs. And he goes, I thought that it was Zeno and not Aristotle who thought that it was infinite.
Oh, really? The guy that I was from Hillsdale that I was talking to last night said that Aristotle was, I'm willing to be wrong on this because I'm just going, this guy was pretty bright though. He was like the head of the philosophy department at Hillsdale. But I don't know. That's something maybe we can look into. But if I'm wrong about that, thank you for correcting me. I'm not sure. But anyway, so real quickly, okay, I got 1 minute to prove the last 3 proofs. You think I can do it? Okay, so Sissel and William and me are possible but not necessary. Okay, we clearly exist, but we were at some point we didn't exist in the past, and at some point we will die and suffer corruption, and so we're just possible. So Thomas says, well, everything in the world that we see falls into that category because nothing is absolutely necessary. But in order for these possible things to exist in the first place, it necessitates the existence of something that is not just possible but necessary. All right? Clear as mud? You got it?
100%.
So you're saying that there has to be this idea of the unmoved mover has to be necessary, not possible. Is that what you're kind of saying?
Yeah, this is a whole different proof, but it does it harkens back to the unmoved mover. It's saying that if all of us how to explain this? If all of us are not necessary but only possible, and that could be true for everything in the world, well, the very fact that possible and not necessary things exist requires that something be necessary, because how did we get here in the first place if we're not necessary? Okay.
Right.
And then I probably won't have time. Okay. The one on perfection just means basically we observe degrees of perfection in the world. Some people are smarter and taller and shorter, and some things are more beautiful and faster and slower. And he just says if there's all these degrees of perfection, there has to be some being that is ultimately perfect in every way in order to kind of like encompass all the perfection itself. Okay, that's not a great example, but intelligence is my favorite. He basically says, hey, we see all these things happen in the world. We see birds building nests and ducks flying south and beavers building dams, and they don't have intelligence, but they all seem to be working for an end. They have purpose.
Right.
They have intention, but it's kind of built into them. Okay, and if creatures that don't have intelligence are working for an end, there has to be an intelligence behind them. Okay, and Thomas, surprise, surprise, says that intelligence is God. Okay, I actually find that
Spoiler.
one. I find that I find that one to be the most convincing because it's the one that's most practical. Because these are things that you can use every day. When you see traffic, you can say, okay, a mover being moved by a car, by a person, and you can go back and back and back and not go to infinite regression and say, okay, there must be a first mover of all things at some point. So anyways, I apologize. That was a quick review of the 5 proofs. But hey, you're studying Thomas Aquinas. You gotta be on the ball with this stuff, right?
Yeah, and I'm sure in next week's email we can include the list of those so that people can look into them a little bit more if they'd like to, and also the article.
Yeah, I do have a write up on it.
Perfect. Yeah,
that
we
I
can include that.
I can include. Yeah, thank you. Great idea. So,
and real quick before we take our break, can I just catch us up on a couple of comments?
Please do.
So Forrest on YouTube said Carlo Broussard has a great presentation on the 5 ways with the Institute of Catholic Culture. So if you also want to look there, maybe we can. That's another resource that you could look into. And Jeremy on Facebook said book 12 of Metaphysics discuss the unmoved mover as well.
Okay, all right. Well, good. See, we got a smart crowd out there watching, and this is something that is talked about a lot and has been for many years. Okay. All right. One of the promises I want to make in this show is we will never waste your time. Okay, so we are we're gonna waste your time for about 1 minute. No, I'm kidding. We're gonna transition, show a little graphic, and we come back. Don't go anywhere because I want to introduce you to 17th century French philosopher, mathematician, physicist, writer, amazing person, Blaise Pascal. And we'll do a deep dive on Pascal for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it up for discussion in the last segment, okay? So quick break, and we'll be right back with Back to the Father. All right, I understand we are back. This is Back to the Father. I'm Dave Palmer, along with Cecil Anderson and William Kirkendall, and we are talking about the restoration of Christian philosophy according to the mind of St. Thomas Aquinas. And in the second segment, we talk about a particular philosopher. And what I do is during the week preparing for this, I just study these people big time. And so I want to present to you a fascinating 17th century French philosopher, and he was more than a philosopher. He was a child prodigy, mathematician, physicist, brilliant guy. Didn't even live to be 40. He was 39 when he died, but boy, he did accomplish a whole lot. His name is Blaise Pascal. And one of the things I want you to do is put these people into historical perspective. You know, last week I was kind of curious in talking about these different periods of time, like the Enlightenment and the Age of Reason and the Renaissance, and there is an age of realism, and we were talking about, you know, what would this age be called? Well, my belief, and somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but the Enlightenment basically was like 14th to 17th century. And then did the Renaissance begin after that? I think maybe the Renaissance was after that. So Blaise Pascal lived at the end of the Enlightenment. Okay, and this was an age of great thought. It wasn't all great in the sense of true, but there were a lot of thinkers. This also was right around the time of René Descartes. Okay, so he would have been a contemporary of René Descartes. Also a guy named Michel Montaigne. Easy for me to say.
Yeah, I was going to say, whoa.
Montaigne. Actually, I may want to focus on him next week because I'm curious about this age. But let's next slide here. Blaise Pascal, French mathematician, inventor, physicist, philosopher, and theologian. All right, he was a child prodigy. Okay, from a very young age, he had a very bright father who tutored him, who was a mathematician. Okay, as I mentioned before, it's thought that Pascal may have been the inventor of the first digital calculator, and some people say he, if nothing else, inspired the production of the computer. And I'll show a cool little picture here in a moment, but he kind of built something. This is 17th century. All right. He also invented the syringe, and he created the hydraulic press, an instrument based upon the principle that became known as Pascal's principle. There's also a unit of like pressure called the Pascal. I don't know if you've ever come across that in your learning. So his name continues. He also laid the foundation for the calculus of probability. He was very interested in probability. You know, like when you gamble, when you take a chance, what's the probability of A happening versus B? And that's going to play very much into his wager that we're going to talk about in a moment. Okay, lived at the end of the Enlightenment period. I mentioned that, and a contemporary of René Descartes, and also here's that name, Michel de Montaigne. Perhaps that's did a lot better that time.
There it is at the bottom. If someone wants to try to pronounce that better.
Michel de Montaigne. Have y'all heard of him? Interesting. I don't know a lot about him, but I'm going to do some research on him. All right, here's a picture of the calculating machine that Blaise Pascal invented back in 1642. Okay, pretty intricate thing. But the point is, we're not going to talk a lot about his science, but more about his philosophy. But brilliant guy. You know, died very, very young. The next slide talks about the fact that in France in the 17th century, there was a heresy that became very, very popular called Jansenism. And it was named after a Dutch bishop called Cornelius Jansen, who lived there in the 17th century, as you can see, and popular in France and Italy in the 17th and 18th centuries. And this is where I think it applies to today, because it arose out of an objection to the laxity of practice of the Catholic faith. Okay, so right now, nowadays, I think most of us probably agree that the Catholic faith in many ways has become kind of lax. You know, the Friday fast isn't really talked about very much, okay? The Jansenists, get this, they wanted 4 Lents a year, okay? They wanted 40 periods of fasting, okay? This is what the Jansenists were. The primary issue that they were dealing with, though, was the relationship between God's grace and man's free will, okay? based on a interpretation of the teaching of St. Augustine and influenced by Protestant leaders such as John Calvin. Okay, Calvin believed basically that man had no free will and it was all God's grace. He believed in double predestination. So wherever God, decides that you're going to go, either heaven or hell, that's where you're going to go and you really have no say about it. So these were Catholics, with air quotes, who were leaning in a Calvinist direction. Okay, they were leaning in an emphasis on grace at the detriment of free will. Okay, the beauty of St. Thomas Aquinas is that he always, was in the middle road, where yes, we're absolutely dependent on grace, but we are creatures that God has blessed with free will. Okay, the Jansenist heresy was condemned by Pope Innocent X in 1653. And now get this. This is interesting also. Who do you think, I don't know if you have this in front of you, I guess you don't, William, but who do you think was the religious group that was
I know this
most...
one, I know this one, because I did do some research too.
Oh, you know this, okay.
And I also knew because I knew about this particular... the issue was it's the Jesuits. This is when they really shined.
Yeah.
They were the ones like at the forefront being like, no. They were writing articles and saying exactly why it wasn't correct.
I know.
So this is their moment to shine.
I heard somebody say the other day that the best education that they could have possibly imagined for their sons would be to go to a Jesuit school in like the 17th century,
wow, yeah.
Going back a few years. But yeah, it was the Jesuits, okay, to their credit, who were battling against the Jansenists, okay, and they were battling them hard, right? And so Blaise Pascal did fall into this heresy of Jansenism, which, good intentions, kind of like extreme radical traditionalists today that go too far, but their intention is to fight against what they see as laxity among some members of the church, right? Okay, now Pascal, similar to what St. Thomas Aquinas experienced late in his life, had a amazing mystical experience on November 13th, 1564, which marked a new life for him, and he called it a night of fire, where he had, according to him, okay, got to assume he's being honest, he had this mystical experience of the living God. And at that moment, okay, so 1564, he was going to live another 8 years. And so at that moment in his life, he said, I'm no longer interested in science. I no longer do math. I no longer do physics. I am going to focus entirely on faith, entirely on God. All right, so he started putting all these notes together. And he died before it was finished, but the famous literary work of Blaise Pascal is called the Pensées. Okay, it translates in French to thoughts. It basically was an apology for the Christian religion. Of course, if you know, apology means not we're saying you're sorry, but defending the Christian religion. I mentioned on Adrian's show this morning that somebody has referred to it as intellectual terrorism. Okay, what he wanted to do, he wanted to terrify people against going to hell. Okay, so he wanted to explain, as it says here, the misery of this life. Okay, that this life without God is absolutely miserable, and it's almost kind of like if there's such a thing, a Christian nihilist, where remember almost the exact opposite of Nietzsche. See, Nietzsche thought that all of our eggs are in this temporal basket, right? You go for it, you go for the gusto, you try to, overcome yourself, you become the best person you can be, and then you're dead and it's over, right? Pascal is the exact opposite. He says this life is basically meaningless. Okay, this life is nothing but just drudgery. And there's absolutely no reason to put all your eggs in this basket because it's sad, it's horrible. That's why he's being called an intellectual terrorist, is that he wants to scare you. A terrorist wants to frighten you in order to do something, right? Why does somebody hold a hostage? They're terrorizing because they want money or they want something, okay? So he was an intellectual terrorist. He wanted to literally scare the hell out of you, okay? And that was his goal in the first part of the Pensées. The second part was happiness of man with God, okay? So he's like, okay, this life is miserable. he had this probably his most famous quote is, all of humanity's problems stem from man's inability to sit quietly in a room alone. He especially blamed young people, okay? And there are 2 young people in this room. But he said young people are constantly filling themselves with distractions. Okay, now
and he said that in that century and not in the 21st century.
Yeah, that they're always, young people are just filled with energy. But he said basically, okay, Sissel, and this is him. This is not an attack on you personally, but he said, sit in a room by yourself with only your thoughts, and no books, no distractions, no phone calls to friends, no games. And he said, you're going to come to the conclusion that your life is miserable. Okay.
Look forward to doing that this afternoon.
Isn't that nice? But that's what he did.
Interesting. Yeah,
okay. And then, but then of course he was obviously a believer.
Right.
Okay. And then he said, the heart has its reasons, which reason knows nothing of. We know the truth not only by the reason, but of the heart. Okay. So this is Blaise Pascal. This is what he is about. And really a very fascinating guy. Okay, so I want to close out this section talking about the wager. All right, Pascal's wager. I think some people have made kind of a simplistic argument about this, but you see the graphic here, and it's on a grid, and there's 2 things to consider. Okay, whether God exists and whether we believe in God. Okay, so each of these 4 little blocks represents like God existing and we believe in God, or God existing, we didn't believe in God. God doesn't exist, we believe in God, or God doesn't exist and we didn't believe in God. Okay, and so what he's saying is, let's take this from the perspective of like a gambler. Like, let's say you're not sure if God exists, but I just want to gamble right. I want to know what the best gamble is. Remember, he was into the calculus of probability, right? And this is where it gets interesting, because he says, if there's a God, God is infinite, okay? This is one of Thomas's, attributes of God, is that God is infinite. And so he says we have to assume that if there is a heaven and we believe in God and we live a good life, we are going to have an infinite degree of pleasure and in happiness, right? So, and also, if you don't believe in God and God exists, you're going to go to hell and you're going to have an infinite degree of pain and agony, right? So if you look at these 4 boxes, he's saying, what's the gamble? What's the best one? And so we'll take these one at a time. And he says, if God exists and we believe in God, well, then we won the jackpot, right? Because we have been awarded an infinite gain. All right. We gambled that God exists. We lived our life as if God exists, and he does exist. We're rewarded with eternal happiness. Okay. So that sounds like a pretty good thing, right?
Right.
Okay. So now let's go into the next one. What if God doesn't exist and we still believed? Okay. So we gambled that God exists, but we were wrong.
Isn't his whole thing that you would have lived a very intentional life regardless?
Yeah.
So he
would have said,
he would have been like, well, try to live as a good person, so there's no harm in that.
Right. Yeah. He said, you may not have, maybe you would have wanted to get drunk or do crazy things, or that has some kind of physical pleasure, or do drugs, or, walk out on your wife, or, whatever, have affairs. And you didn't do that. And maybe you had some, desire to do it. You didn't do it, but you still had a very good life. In fact, a better life than if you had done that. So he said, even then, that's a pretty good gamble. Okay, you were wrong, but you had a good life and your life is over, but it was finite. Okay, so now let's go to if God exists and you didn't believe. Okay, that's the 3rd quadrant, right? This is an infinite, yeah. Then you have an infinite degree of pain and agony. Your entire existence for infinity, according to Christian tradition, is going to be pain and in both physical and mental pain, okay? You lost big time, and not finitely, but infinitely, okay? And then the final one is, which one did we not have? That, okay, God doesn't exist.
And you believe.
And you believe.
Yeah.
Okay, so no, we already did that one, right?
Did we?
Wait,
Yeah.
So we've only done 3.
Yeah, we've done 3. So
Okay.
we did God
You
exists.
don't believe and he doesn't exist. That would be the last one, wouldn't it be?
Okay, yeah. Okay, so you don't believe and he doesn't exist. Okay, well then you lived a wild, profligate life. You did all the things that you wanted to do, and you, like Frank Sinatra said, you did it your way. And maybe there was some temporal benefit to that, and you got to go out and party and carouse and do all these things, but it was still finite, okay? Because in the end, you died and you got eaten by worms, okay? So he's saying, of those 4 quadrants, which one is the most appealing overall? Which 2 are the most appealing? And Blaise Pascal would say the 2 most appealing are both believing in God, even if he doesn't exist, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay, so that's the Pascal wager, but you have to understand infinity versus finite, and the infinite good versus a finite good, and an infinite evil or suffering versus a finite suffering. And that's why Pascal, very interested in probability, said, even if you want to just, say, I'm just going to do it from a gambling perspective, the best gamble is to believe in God, okay? And so that is Pascal's wager, and pretty interesting. So anyways, let's take another break. It's 42 after. This is Back to the Father. We've been talking about 17th century French philosopher and overall Renaissance man, Blaise Pascal. Would love to know your thoughts on him. Did that make sense? Does the Pascal's wager make you think that even from a wagering standpoint, it's better to believe in God? Call us up or comment when we come back, and we're also going to open up the forum here, the panel inside our studio, and let Sissel and William give us their thoughts. 877-757-9424, 877-757-9424. We'll be back with Back to the Father after this. All right, we're back. Final segment. Back to the Father. I've thrown a lot of information at you today about the 5 proofs, the first article of the Summa, and then Blaise Pascal, 17th century French philosopher. And, it's like we were talking about Nietzsche last week. Nietzsche was a lot more wrong than Blaise Pascal. Blaise Pascal was a believer. He was an intense believer. But there's always something good, some lesson to learn from everybody, every philosopher. And that's why I think it's even good to highlight some of the errant ones, because we can learn something, and also we can see how they may have influenced and continue to influence our culture today. So at this time, I would like to throw it over to William and Sissel. I know William's taken 2 pages of notes, so you've got something there, William. But any takeaways or anything that you want to comment about what we talked about?
Well, I mean, there's a lot. I won't get to all of it, but I can I can do a little bit. So let's see here. I thought it was interesting. We're not going back to your first segment. We're not. There's something besides philosophy. There's something besides the wisdom we can just know in nature. There's something we have a supernatural, and that's very interesting to always be reminded about, because we just think of the natural world, but there's always something other than just nature. So that's interesting. It was interesting when you said that we have a church specifically for helping us get to our final end. I think of the when the church began at Pentecost, the fruit of that mystery of the rosary is love of God. And so I think it kind of like connects in that correlation, because the church is here and God gave it to us because he loves us to get us to that final end.
Yeah. And if I may just break in real quickly, we're doing a live remote this morning from the Knights of Columbus State Convention, and the new Supreme Knight, he's got an Irish name, Patrick Kelly, I think is his name. He has started this initiative where he wants the Knights to be very intentional in evangelization, because I love the Knights. I'm a Knight, but I think a lot of times people think of fish fries and they think of Special Olympics and a lot of the good works that they do and their insurance program. But the Supreme Knight is saying, our mission. All that other stuff is great, but we've got to evangelize. We got to lead people to Christ. And so I think that he's understanding that the church's mission ultimately is to lead people to their eternal home. But and people who want to get to heaven are naturally going to want to feed the homeless and shelter the naked, the homeless, and all that. But it's not our primary mission. Our primary mission is to love God and get to God. And like I say, in the meantime, we're going to want to naturally do temporal, worldly things in the process.
Absolutely.
But anyways, good point there.
Yes, thank you. Let's see. It was interesting that, we observe, you've talked about motion in the 5 Proofs of God, and that we observe motion in every day, and that there has to be some cause and effect. There has to be something that starts it all off. And as we were talking about this in the first segment, I thought it was interesting because the atheist astronomers, a lot of the time, they talk about their, how is the universe created? And we ask them these kind of questions, and they claim that there is a multiverse that created the universe that we live in, but that doesn't really add up.
Who created the multiverse?
Yeah,
right?
Who created the multiverse?
Like, where was that
right.
caused?
Because I mean, like at first it's like, okay, so there has to be this unmoved mover that does something, but the multiverse, there has to be like you said, an intelligent being. But is the multiverse an intelligent being? No.
Yeah.
So you have to have an intelligent being above the multiverse. If the multiverse was even a thing, there'd have to be something that created the multiverse. And if you want to make the claim that the multiverse created the universe, well, none of that adds up if there's no being in the first place.
Yeah, it kind of goes back to the ontological argument of St. Anselm, where God is that which nothing greater can be conceived, which interestingly, Aquinas did not really like that argument very much. He actually refers to it in that article on the 5 Proofs, saying that it's not sufficient. He didn't think that the existence of God was self-evident. Self-evident things are things that can't be proved. But he did think that God's existence could be proved, but only through our relationship with the natural world, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
So, all right, well, good point. So what else?
Yes. Okay, So, just to finish up, before I move on into the second segment real quick, is possible but not necessary. Something has to be necessary. That's a very convincing argument, I think, for the intelligent being creating the universe and creating us. interesting about finding out how Blaise Pascal fell into the heresy we're talking about, Jansenism, I believe. That was interesting. I didn't read up on that this morning, so that was interesting to learn about. Mystical experience. I didn't know he wrote what you said. He wrote a book on the defense of the Christian religion, right?
Yeah, that's Ponce. That's the big one that he didn't finish.
Okay, cool. Yeah, that was interesting. I thought one of the most interesting things you said in the second segment about him is how he terrified people in a good way to not go to hell. That's interesting. That it's a really interesting tactic when you use it for good purposes. When you tell people, you're very likely going to end up here if you don't shape up and change your ways. I think it's very interesting that he did it, and I mean it's probably effective for most people if you have those arguments in place and all that. So.
Yeah, I often wonder, and Manny's here, and Manny and I both share the fact that we have children. You guys don't have children yet, but is the whole kind of scaring kids into, if you do this, you could go to hell. I actually think, I don't know if it's effective, but it's true, Yeah, I mean, if you die in a state of mortal sin, you will go to hell, but the people nowadays would say, don't say that.
It's not like dishonest to say that at all. Is it, I don't know, I don't have kids, so I can only think from like me being a kid with my parents. My parents definitely would, put the fear of God in me for lots of things, if you do this, you'll do, not necessarily directing it to hell, but like, you'll be in trouble with us sort of thing. And it works to an extent, but I think there has to be the understanding of like why they desire you to not go to hell, why you desire, like very much the loving end of it, of like, this is not just because we want to stop you from having fun. It's just like there's a
and I think that the Jansenists, kind of like I think radical traditionalists today, their intention is very good. I mean, their intention is they see that there's a laxity that's going on in the church and the culture today, and they want to bring it back, but they do it in an extreme manner. But it's like you see your 5-year-old kid getting on a roller coaster without a seat, without a belt on, and you realize, my goodness, this kid is going to die.
Right.
If they don't have a belt on, they are going to die. And you wouldn't say, should I say something or should I not?
Right.
I don't want to be overbearing, but you're going to run out there and anyway, by any means possible, you're going to say, get a seatbelt on. And I tend to think there isn't enough of that in the culture today. And again, Jansenism always responds to something that's lax. I think, John Calvin, I don't quite understand Calvinists. I have a very good friend who is talking to him yesterday. Yesterday was his birthday, and he's a double predestination Calvinist, and I just
all the way.
I don't understand it.
It's a confusing.
Then we just become robots, and we're just. But of course, the Calvinists all believe that they're predestined and they're going to heaven.
Because they magically know that.
Yeah, they know they are. Yeah,
I have a couple of comments I want to catch up on real quick. And so it's interesting when you were talking about Pascal's wager, and I had heard about it. I was aware of it, but it had been a minute since I'd actually looked at the graph and seeing it. Forrest commented something that I had been thinking the whole time was, doesn't that sort of defeat the purpose of desiring God if you're like doing it for a wager? So it's not like, obviously if you're following God, even if for the sake of winning a wager or something like that, maybe not, your heart's not fully in it, but you're still doing the good acts, you're avoiding sin and things like that. That obviously is still good. But if your heart is not really like, I believe in you, God, just because I actually believe in you, but it's like, well, I have got nothing better, might as well believe in you. Is that something, Well,
I think you're right. That's one of the arguments against the wager is that, what is it possible that in the end God could say, you're just here because you gambled it. I mean, you have no love in your heart, so, right. So it's a wager in that regard. But I think the wager works with somebody who is a hardened atheist, let's just say, but they're also rational, as we all are. And you can try to reason and just, again, scare, and I say this not to be to use a potty mouth, but to scare the hell out of them. I mean, that literally you love them so much, and you are on your way to hell. And let me just explain one way to explain it, that it doesn't have to do with scripture. It doesn't have to do with quoting the Catechism or even St. Thomas Aquinas. This is strictly on just reason and probability. Okay, because like I said, even if you live the way you live, if there isn't a God, it's a very temporal gain, whereas you may be throwing out an infinite gain by not believing in God. So, but I think there's definitely limitations without a doubt.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I want to throw in real quickly. Adrian mentioned this morning that Trent Horn did a Pascal's wager for abortion.
Oh,
Where
interesting.
okay, if I keep the child or if I don't, and if I what was the other one? There was on a thing, and Adrian was explaining it. You can apply this to a lot of things. Let's just say if you abort a child, you might have more freedom and you might be able to go get that college degree without raising a child. But what is the loss? And what is the gain in accepting the child? So you can, it's an interesting little...
It's like a little graph that you can use for multiple things in life.
Right. Yeah. What's, a lot of ways to do it. It's like, okay, if I take this job, what are the pros? What are the cons?
Yeah.
But Pascal just applied it to belief in God, and the ultimate rewards and punishments. So
Yeah, I got more comments coming in, so let me just kind of go back here. We have Annabelle saying, after the multiplication of the loaves, Jesus rebuked the crowds for looking for him just so that they could be fed, which is another interesting observation there as well.
Yeah.
And then and then Forrest is also saying it is true, even imperfect contrition is efficacious. So yeah, again, doing all these things, it's not that it's like bad, but it could be better, I think is the idea. And then Jeremy on Facebook says, yes, so love over fire and brimstone. JP2 wrote similarly, so making sure to balance the wanting to, put the fear of hell, but also in a way that shows the love of God too. And then Paula says, living a life believing in the existence of God and in his way also opens up infinite channels of grace in the soul of the believer, which ultimately gives the most fulfilled life here on earth. And I want the abundant life.
Is that my wife, Paula?
That is your wife, Paula,
But I have a brilliant wife. Thanks for that comment. I tell you, there's never been a moment in my life that I didn't believe in God. But that's the theological virtue of faith, right? I mean, because faith is infused. Faith isn't, and I'm not like bragging. I'm just saying I'm thankful. And it wasn't like something that I earned. Like I spent 20 hours in adoration so that I could believe in God. It to some degree, belief is a gift. It is an infused virtue. And I've always found that kind of confusing because it's infused at baptism, but there are some baptized people that don't believe. So like, well, what happened there? They got the infused gift, but they didn't respond to it. So it's interesting.
It's like the atheist, all those other people, they ask you, well, why are you Catholic? And I mean, the ultimate answer is, well, because I believe that Jesus rose from the dead and that he died to save my sins. But they're going to ask you, okay, can you prove that? But it's in believing that you really, that's the whole point about faith is you really just have to believe.
Start with belief.
Yeah.
Faith-seeking understanding is what Augustine said.
Yeah,
right.
And Annabelle also followed up with her comment saying, she goes, there's a such thing as fake it until you make it, so maybe the heart will follow the actions too. So like in the wager, like, if you decide to go down that path, and to be fair, I'm sure there's lots of times many Catholics are, sitting in the pew going to mass, sometimes just out of obedience and obligation and not always, may not be feeling it that day, may not be feeling, but they know, like they believe, but they might be struggling, but they're still going through the actions, and that the graces that come from that.
And that's better than disbelief. So
exactly.
All right, very good comments. Do you want to do a couple of trivia questions?
Yeah. So my trivia today is I thought that Blaise Pascal was dropping some good lines, some interesting lines.
Oh, yeah.
And so, most philosophers do. That's kind of their job.
Part of the job description.
You got to eloquently put together like a little mic drop moment. Yeah. So I looked up a few, and I am going to read a few philosopher quotes, and you have to tell me if you think it's Blaise Pascal or not. And if it's not, maybe you can guess who it is. They're all known philosophers. So.
Okay. How many total?
I don't know, because you quoted some of the things that I was going to quote from Blaise Pascal, so I can't use all of them. So I'm just going to go through. Okay. First up, I cannot teach anybody anything. I can only make them think.
I'd say that is not him.
I would also agree it's not him.
You would both be correct. Do you have any
that doesn't
ideas?
sound like him. See, Pascal.
Yeah.
That's not intellectual terrorism.
Nope,
Yep, nope.
that is not. Do we have an idea who this might be?
Descartes? To think,
Think about-
famous philosopher?
Yeah.
Nietzsche?
The most famous, most potentially.
Oh, Aristotle?
I'll go for
Plato.
Yeah. No, keep going back.
Oh,
keep going back.
Socrates.
Yeah,
Okay,
Socrates.
yeah, that
Most
sounds
famous
very
one.
Socratic. Yes.
Yes. All right. Let's see. Without music, life would be a mistake.
Oh, was that? I that does not sound like Pascal.
I would have to agree again.
That sounds like Plato.
It's not Plato. It's our friend Nietzsche.
Oh, Nietzsche. Okay,
really?
yeah.
Nietzsche.
Yeah,
Remember,
Nietzsche
he
was very much into the arts.
Flaw,
Yes,
the
that
flaw,
makes sense.
who apparently, he was criticized very highly. Remember, of his work, his own composing.
Okay. Well, she hasn't done a Pascal yet one, but the law of probability says the next one is. But since I said that the law of probability just reversed.
Two things. Did it not? Kind words don't cost much, yet they accomplish much. This one feels like it would be on a Hallmark card.
That does not sound
No,
like
it's not.
Pascal. Not at all.
It-
That
No
sounds like
way.
Nietzsche.
According to the article I found, it is Blaise Pascal.
Kind words?
Yeah,
Oh,
don't cost
really?
much. I really wanted to. I didn't have as much time this morning because of the
Okay.
live remote to cross check some of these. But several hundred people on Goodreads said that it was him.
Okay, well,
So
we'll take it as an
doesn't
assumption
really
that
seem like
it
it's going
was.
to be on a greeting card, though. You know.
Yeah. Nietzsche was more the greeting card kind of
Yeah,
guy.
yeah,
He was
yeah.
very much kind of a power of positive thinking kind of guy.
All right, let's do. When we are tired, we are attacked by ideas we conquered long ago.
I'm going to say that is Pascal.
I
Yeah.
would say no.
Ooh.
Ooh,
All right. We got a little battle going on
Let
here.
me just double
No.
check and make sure no one else is commenting on this. Let me read it one more time. It is hard enough to. Oh,
Yeah.
that's not the right one. I just switched it. When we are tired, we are attacked by ideas conquered long ago. And William would be right, actually.
Oh, all
It is
right.
Friedrich Nietzsche.
Oh, is
Oh,
that
wow.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Well,
All
you're
right.
all about Nietzsche, aren't you?
All about that Nietzsche. Okay. People almost invariably arrive at their beliefs not on the basis of proof, but on the basis of what they find attractive.
No.
Law of probability says you've got to at some point pull up one of these from Pascal. You've had very few, if any. I'm going to say yes.
I'm going to say no.
Ooh.
This
Again.
time Dave is right.
Tied up the score, youngster.
All right,
There we
let's
go.
do another one to try to see if we can have a winner here.
Okay, is this the championship
This is
round?
the championship
Okay,
round.
This is it.
Okay.
All right.
You're going down, young man.
We'll see about that.
Sorry, I lost the one I was on.
She's like,
I took screenshots.
Now, this is also a little psychology. Like, is she going to pick a Pascal?
Yeah, exactly.
You know, at
yeah.
the end, and now she's like, oh gosh, they're on to me.
Yeah.
Y'all are stressing me out so much.
Well, no, it's okay.
I just need to
It's
have
okay.
a list so that I don't think about it at all.
Right,
Okay.
right, yeah.
All right. I would prefer an intelligent hell to a stupid paradise.
Wow.
I would prefer an intelligent hell to a stupid paradise.
I will go with yes, that is Pascal.
I'm going to say it is not. That sounds like
I think-
Nietzsche.
For the very first time ever, William has won trivia. That was Pascal.
All right.
Again, according
that was
to
my
Goodreads.
second guess, by the way. That
okay,
was
of course.
okay. All right.
Yes, that was fun.
Was that a backhanded compliment when you said for the first time ever he
Well,
won?
I was more trying to celebrate it, but I realized
okay.
after the fact that came out a little bit rough. I'm sorry, William. I'm proud of you.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thanks everybody for watching. Sissel's not going to be with us next week. Maneater is going to be running the board. Of course, you're coming back next week, right?
will be here next week,
okay.
yep.
Okay. Now that you've won the
reigning
you're the
champion.
reigning champion.
And he
You
doesn't
gotta
have to
come
compete
back
against me next week,
and-
so,
and
you know.
So it's okay. All right. Thanks everybody for your comments and for watching. I don't know who the philosopher is going to be, but hey, join our email list, okay? Back to the Father at grnonline.com, and I will have chosen the philosopher by Monday, and you'll find out who it is. And also a couple of articles will be linked from the Summa Theologia, so you can prepare for the show on Friday, okay? Have a great weekend. God bless you. We'll see you next Friday for the next Back to the Father.
Thanks for joining us for Back to the Father. And don't forget, the glory of God is the human person fully alive. If you have comments about the show, email Dave Palmer at grnonline.com.